At my dad's birthday party, my name tag said, "The disappointment." My stepmom laughed. Well, it's true. So I stood up, clinked my glass, and said, "I'd like to make a toast to the last time you'll ever see me." Dad choked, but the real shock came when I walked out the door and left behind one final. I'm 32 years old, and if you asked my dad about me, he'd probably say I'm the family's greatest letdown. Not because I've broken the law, not because I'm unemployed, and certainly not because I've done anything truly wrong, but simply because I chose to carve out a life on my own terms, rather than follow the neatly drawn-out blueprint he'd crafted for me. My father, Henry, is a man who thrives on control. Order, image, and unwavering family loyalty have always been his holy trinity. Loyalty, of course, being conditional on whether it benefits him. When my parents split up, I was just 10. It wasn't a messy breakup, at least not in the ways people could see. But within a year, my dad had already remarried. Her name was Rose. She had 2 kids from a previous marriage, Hunter and Alice, and that's when everything began to shift. At first, I tried. I was just a kid who wanted her dad to be happy. Rose had that overly sweet, performative charm people often mistake for kindness. In public, she'd wrap her arms around me in 2 tight hugs and chirp, "I just know we're going to be best friends." But once we were behind closed doors, it was obvious. Her world revolved around her own children. My dad, once so present in my life, slowly became someone else's father. It started small, missing my soccer games while never failing to show up for Hunters, forgetting to pick me up from school but sitting front row at Alice's dance recitals. And then it got worse. By the time I was 14, I was expected to babysit them, clean up after them, and play the role of the mature older sister while they ran wild without consequences. If I ever pushed back, my dad would let out a weary sigh like I was some endless burden and say, "They just need more attention. You're older, be mature." Rose? She didn't sugarcoat it. She'd look me dead in the eye and call me selfish. But the final blow came when my dad emptied the savings account my mom had set up for me, money that was meant for college. My mom fought him hard in court to get it back, but the damage was irreversible. I was livid. The last year of high school, I barely spoke to him. And when I finally left for college, which I paid for entirely on my own, I stopped coming back, except for the occasional holiday. Years went by, and our relationship never really healed. Sure, I'd get invited to family gatherings, but they always felt obligatory, like a checkbox to mark off rather than a real desire to see me. To my dad and Rose, I was just the troublemaker who refused to smile and play along. Meanwhile, Hunter and Alice, they could do no wrong. Which brings me to my dad's birthday. Rose was throwing him one of those absurdly extravagant parties, the kind where everyone you've ever crossed paths with gets an invite. I wasn't planning to go. But my aunt, one of the few people in the family who still made an effort to stay connected, urged me to just stop by for a bit. Maybe she suggested things had changed. Spoiler alert, they hadn't. From the second I stepped through the door, I felt it. That same old, unwelcome energy. Faces I hadn't seen in years were there, but instead of warm hugs or familiar smiles, I got stiff nods and hollow greetings. Conversations swirled around me, but no one really included me. Across the room, I spotted my dad laughing with a group of old friends. But when his eyes found mine, his grin twitched, just for a moment, like he was surprised I actually showed up. I was already questioning why I'd come when something caught my eye. A small table set up near the entrance, lined with name tags. Rose loved doing this at parties, always saying it helped people mingle. Most of the tags were standard: Uncle Mark, Cousin Rachel, Neighbor Tom. But then I saw mine, and I froze. My name tag didn't just have my name. It had something else, something that made my stomach twist. I picked it up and stared at it. From across the room, I heard a laugh I knew all too well. Rose. She stood there, wine glass in hand, a smug little smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I clenched the name tag in my hand, feeling a flush rise to my cheeks. This wasn't going to go the way she thought it would. I stood there for a moment, gripping the name tag between my fingers. My brain took a moment longer than usual to register what I was seeing. There it was. My name, printed just like everyone else's, but underneath, in smaller, deliberately chosen letters, someone had written, "The Disappointment." At first, I told myself it had to be a bad joke, some misguided attempt at humor, maybe from a clueless cousin who thought it would get a laugh. Or maybe it was just a bizarre mix-up. But then I heard her laugh, Rose's, and when I looked up, There she was, perched by the bar like she owned the room, swirling a glass of red wine in her hand, with that infuriatingly smug expression painted across her face. Our eyes met, and that smirk of hers deepened into something slow, smug, and deeply satisfied. My pulse started pounding in my ears. I could feel it, eyes flicking in my direction, whispers brushing past me like static. No one said a word, but the silence was heavy, expectant. It was as if the room was holding its breath, silently pleading, "Don't cause a scene." I inhaled slowly and gently set the name tag back on the table. I smoothed it out with the edge of my finger, making sure it lined up perfectly with the others. For a brief second, I almost laughed. Of course she'd pull something like this. It was classic Rose, never loud, never direct. Just passive-aggressive enough that if I reacted, I'd look unhinged. Not enough to be obvious to the whole room, but just enough to twist the knife. I should have sensed it the moment I walked through the front door. A hand landed gently on my shoulder. I turned to see my aunt, the only person in this whole mess of a family who ever truly saw me. Her brow was furrowed, her mouth set in a tight, worried line. She'd seen it. Her gaze flicked over to Rose, then back to me. "You okay?" she asked quietly. I forced a small, controlled smile. "Yeah," I said. "I'm fine." But I wasn't. I was worn down in a way I couldn't even name anymore. Not just tired, drained, soul deep. Because this wasn't new. It wasn't even the worst. It was just another brick in the wall Rose had spent years building. A constant, quiet reminder that I didn't belong. Not really. I should have turned around and walked out right then. I should have spared myself another evening of being silently erased. But something inside me, something stubborn, defiant, maybe just done, refused. Not this time. So instead, I straightened my shoulders, drew in a long breath, and did something I knew she wouldn't expect. I smiled. Not a tight, bitter one, but easy, radiant, like nothing had happened at all. Then I reached for a flute of champagne from a tray a server passed by, tapped it lightly with my nail, and turned toward the crowd. If Rose wanted to put on a show, I'd give her one. I raised my glass just enough for a few heads to turn. The delicate clink of my nail against the glass was subtle, but noticeable, just enough to pause a few conversations. I saw Rose hesitate, her fingers tightening slightly around the stem of her wine glass, her eyes narrowing as she studied me, trying to calculate my next move. I let the silence hang in the air for a beat too long, like I was considering delivering a toast. Then I gave a slight shake of my head and turned away, walking deeper into the party. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a meltdown, not yet. The party was exactly what I'd expected. Crowded, over-orchestrated, dripping in wealth and performance. The catering was 5-star, the decorations pristine, and everything screamed, "Look how perfect we are." Because for Rose, none of this was ever just about my dad's birthday. It was a stage, a chance to show off their picture-perfect life. The love, the success, the children, their children. I didn't count. Hunter and Alice were already holding court in the center of the room. Alice, glowing in a designer dress, was surrounded by a circle of aunts and cousins, gushing about her upcoming wedding. "And of course, Dad's footing the bill," she said with a polished grin, spinning the massive diamond ring on her finger. We wanted something really elegant, not one of those tacky Pinterest messes. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Alice had always been like that. Perfectly poised, just self-centered enough to keep the spotlight on her without making it too obvious. Hunter, meanwhile, leaned against the bar, sipping whiskey while a few of Dad's old college buddies clapped him on the back, congratulating him on his new job, one I was almost certain he hadn't earned. Because Hunter never had to earn anything. Every step forward in his life had been paved by my father, every mistake quietly erased, every failure spun into some kind of charming anecdote. I was this close to marching over and sliding into their little circle just to watch the discomfort twist across their faces. But before I could make a move, I heard my father's voice behind me. "Ah," he said, and when I turned, there he was, making his way toward me with a drink in hand, that same carefully measured expression on his face. "Didn't think you'd show." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Wouldn't miss it. He gave a small nod, glanced briefly at the crowded room, then back at me. "I hear you've been busy." There it was. The usual distant, surface-level small talk, the way he always danced around actually asking anything real about my life. I gave a short nod. Yeah, work's going great. Bought a house last year. His eyebrows lifted just a touch. A house? Yep. He took a sip of his drink, offering no follow-up, no curiosity, no acknowledgement. That was the thing about my dad. He couldn't stand it when I succeeded at something he hadn't orchestrated. Every time I accomplished something without his wallet or his guidance, it cracked the version of me he preferred to believe in. The version that was lost, reckless, immature. He didn't like this version of me, the one who didn't need his approval. He couldn't brag about me, but he couldn't pity me either. I could practically feel him scraping the back of his mind for a subtle jab, a sideways comment to reassert control. But before he could, Rose's voice sliced clean through the tension. Well, she said, suddenly appearing at his side, her smile all sparkle and teeth. At least she finally did something responsible. And just like that, the heat flared in my chest again. I turned to her, and there she was, glowing with that well-rehearsed grin, the kind meant to look warm but always felt like a dare. I knew that look too well. Rose was a master of the passive-aggressive dig. She could insult you in plain sight, then make you feel like you were the problem for reacting. She'd just laugh it off, call it a joke, accuse you of being too sensitive. I should have walked away. I should have brushed it off like I'd done so many times before. But something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the name tag. Maybe it was the fact that my dad had barely looked at me before going back to working the room. Or maybe it was standing here in a space filled with people who had never really been my family. Whatever it was, I was done. I turned to Rose, head tilted slightly. You know, I was going to let it slide, I said, my tone light, almost amused. But I have to ask, whose idea was the name tag? Something flickered in her expression, just for a second, before she let out a high, dismissive laugh. Oh, come on. You always take things too personally. It was a joke. I nodded slowly. Right, hilarious. She gave a careless shrug, lifting her wine glass. Maybe if you weren't so angry all the time, you'd... I raised a finger, cutting her off mid-sentence. Actually, I said calmly, you're right. Her eyes narrowed. About what? About the joke, I replied, turning slightly and lifting my glass. Because, now that I think of it, I've got one too. She blinked, confused. My father shifted beside her, suddenly uneasy. And then I smiled, slow and sure. I'd like to make a toast. The hum of conversation around the room began to soften, not all at once, but gradually, as heads turned toward me. People love a toast, especially the kind they don't see coming. I felt my father stiffen beside me. Rose let out a short laugh and shifted her weight, trying to wave it off. You don't have to. I held up a hand, my smile still in place. No, really, I insist. The energy in the room shifted as more eyes turned toward me, curious. A low murmur rolled through the guests, some raising their glasses, ready for a cheerful little speech. They had no idea what was coming. Rose's smile began to twitch at the edges, but she held firm, still clinging to the idea that I was the same quiet girl she'd always underestimated, the one who swallowed every insult, let every wound scab over without complaint. But my dad, he wasn't as confident. He knew better. His fingers tightened around his glass. And for the first time all evening, he didn't glance through me or around me. He looked at me. I let the silence hang for just a beat longer, letting the suspense bloom before finally raising my glass. To my father, I began, my voice light, almost conversational, and of course to Rose, because without them, I don't think I would have learned one of the most valuable lessons of my life. I took a slow, deliberate sip of champagne, letting the bubbles settle on my tongue before swallowing. Across the room, Rose gave a light, breathy laugh. Oh boy, here we go. A few scattered chuckles followed. They thought this was my usual routine, me making a harmless joke at my own expense, smoothing things over like I always did to keep the peace. I smiled, but there was weight behind it this time. No, I'm serious, I said, my tone calm, almost warm. Because I think the people who push our buttons, the ones who make things hard, those are often the ones who teach us the most, don't you think? I turned toward my father, fixing my eyes on him. Dad, You've always said that family is about lifting each other up, about standing by one another and celebrating each other's wins. I saw his throat move as he swallowed hard, his hand tightening around his glass. He could feel it. This wasn't going where he hoped. I kept going, voice steady. And I used to believe that. I truly did. But somewhere along the line, I had to face the truth. The room went still. You could feel the shift in the air. Rose's hand gripped her wine glass so tightly I half expected it to crack right there. I set my own glass down gently on a side table, letting my words land without rush. I realized that, for some people, support is only conditional. It's there as long as you play the role they've assigned you. Maybe you're the golden child, maybe you're the scapegoat. Either way, they keep you locked in that role. And the second you step out of it, I let out a breath, shaking my head. They show you exactly who they are. Around me, I sensed the tension grow thick. Uneasy glances, subtle shifts. Alice looked to our father, waiting to mimic his reaction. Hunter, ever the detached spectator, wore a crooked smile, like this was all just another episode of family theater. Rose still held her fake smile, but her knuckles were pale. I looked down for a moment, then spoke again. Softer now, but with no less resolve. I used to think that if I just worked hard enough, if I kept my head down, played by the rules, made something of myself, you'd see me. That maybe one day I'd stop being the disappointment. I glanced up, but now I understand. It was never really about me at all. Rose opened her mouth to interrupt. Of course she did, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned my focus back to my father, because at the end of the day, I was never meant to succeed, was I? His expression cracked, just a flicker, but I saw it. I let the moment stretch, then straightened my shoulders and exhaled. But I did. I built something on my own. I made a life that has nothing to do with this family, and I've never felt more at peace, more whole. I could see the confusion spreading across people's faces, the quiet murmur of disbelief, curiosity. They had no idea what I was talking about because they'd only ever known the version of me Rose and my father carefully constructed. Rose gave another forced laugh, louder this time, trying to reclaim the moment. Oh, come on, this is ridiculous. It's just a name tag. I turned toward her, my voice smooth, even. You're right, it is just a name tag. But it's also a symbol. One in a long, long line of little jabs, tiny reminders that no matter what I do, no matter who I become, you'll always see me as the disappointment. My father stepped forward slightly, clearing his throat. That's enough, he said, voice strained. I looked him dead in the eye. Oh, I agree. It is enough. And before anyone could react, before they could talk over me or twist it into something else, I picked up my glass again. I raised it slightly, the room holding its breath. To the last time you'll ever see me. The silence that followed was thick and absolute. My father stood frozen. Rose's jaw dropped open just a fraction before she snapped it shut again. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered, "Wait, what?" But I didn't say another word. I gently placed my glass back on the table, turned around, and walked toward the door. I could feel their eyes on me, confusion, panic, disbelief curling in the air like smoke. Because this time, it wasn't just a dramatic exit. This time was real. I glanced back one last time before I stepped outside. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was storming away from a fight. I was walking toward something. Toward freedom. Toward peace. Toward the life I've been building away from the drama that had always defined my family. As I stepped outside, I took a deep breath, the cool night air filling my lungs. It was over. I had cut ties in the way I should have years ago. There was no more pretending. No more trying to win approval from people who had never cared about me unless I fit their image of what I was supposed to be. I drove home that night in complete silence, the city lights blurring past as a strange sense of freedom settled into my chest, growing stronger with each passing mile. By the time I stepped into my dimly lit apartment, I should have felt relief, but instead, I was caught somewhere between calm and doubt. Sitting alone in my living room, surrounded by the quiet I'd always craved, a small voice in the back of my mind kept whispering, "Did I cross a line? Did I handle it the right way? Was I too harsh? The next few days felt like a whirlwind I wasn't ready to face. My phone buzzed constantly, texts, calls, missed FaceTimes, but I ignored all of them. I didn't even open social media because I knew the digital storm waiting there was nothing but gossip and outrage. I had walked out of my dad's birthday party. No, not just walked out. I had made a statement in front of everyone. A very public, very intentional moment that shattered the perfectly staged illusion Rose had tried so hard to build. The family group chat was on fire, everyone chiming in like some twisted town hall, but I said nothing. I wasn't ready to face whatever drama they were preparing to hurl my way. Then came a message that made me pause. My aunt, the one person in the family who'd always truly seen me, reached out. Just one line. "Are you okay?" I stared at her message for a long time, fingers hovering over the keyboard. How do you explain the feeling of being both completely at peace and entirely unsure at the same time? I replied simply, "I just need time." She didn't push me. She never did. The next morning, my phone rang. It was my dad. I let it go to voicemail the first time, but he called again. This time I picked up. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice carrying that same cold disappointment I'd heard my whole life, like no matter what I said or did, I was always falling short. "I'm home," I replied, "and I'm not coming back." He was quiet for a beat too long. "You can't just disappear like this," he finally said. "We're family. We stick together." I didn't even pause. Not if sticking together means pretending to be someone I'm not anymore. That was the last time we spoke. Weeks rolled by, and I kept my distance. I skipped every family event, weddings, birthday dinners, holiday get-togethers. The rest of them either followed my dad and Rose's lead or acted like nothing had happened. Through whispers passed between extended relatives and secondhand updates, I heard my dad had taken it hard. Rose was livid. Hunter and Alice were disappointed in me for making a scene. But none of it touched me. I had finally chosen myself, and no amount of guilt-tripping could convince me that was wrong. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, but I was still moving forward, still building a life that felt like mine. And for once, that was enough. I wasn't thrilled about having to sever ties with most of my family, but there was a stillness inside me I hadn't felt in years. I haven't spoken to anyone in the family since that day. So here I am asking, am I the a-hole for walking out like that, for making the toast and cutting them off completely? Did I take it too far? Or was I justified in finally standing up for myself? I know I'll never get my dad's approval. I know I'll never be the daughter you wanted. But part of me thinks that maybe I've finally figured out that I don't need to be so. Ardit let me know. Was I out of line? Or was this long overdue? If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more content like this, make sure to like and subscribe. Don't forget to drop a comment below, sharing your thoughts.